Hello and welcome back. This is Kavya and today we are looking at Unit 3 of Block 2. It is called Experimental Research and Field Experiment. This is part of MPC005 Research Methods of the first year MA Psychology IGNOU course. So as I always say, please keep your textbook with you so that it's easy for you to understand the content. And here the content will be discussed from the purview of exams. So all the topics which have been repeatedly asked for exams will be mentioned, and we'll be looking at this subject more from an exam point of view, and we'll be discussing only in English so that it's easy for you to write your exam in English. So the topic is experimental research and in brackets field experiment. Once you start reading the topic, you will understand that these are two different terms and not the same thing. Field experiment is considered as one type of experimental research. So experimental research, they've given 4 types. One is lab experiment, then field experiment, then field studies and survey research. So the text matter has slightly confusing content. So here when we see in the 3.0 introduction, you can see lab experiment. Okay, we can understand that as something happening in the lab. Then the next one is experiment research, and in bracket it's given field experiment. Third is field studies. Fourth is survey research. So it may look like an overlap between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. So make sure when you learn this subject, you are able to understand the different terms and the meaning so that you don't get confused with this. So here I'm not sure what they have put here, but I'm just going by the text. It seems confusing to me. There's a slight overlap is what I have felt when I've been reading this topic. The topic 3.2 is experimental research and field experiments, and in that you get to see 3.2.1 identifying the research problem. So this looks like steps of experimental research, but this topic is not going to the steps. It's just telling you how to identify a research problem. Okay, and here we are going to understand the difference between experimental research and field experiments. Okay, so that is what is being covered in this topic. So as always, we know the first step is to identify and define the research problem, and it's very important to define it so that the operationalization of the problem becomes easier, so that we are able to design the research process well, get the proper data collection, analysis, and find out the conclusions better way. So next we are going to the topic experimental research and understand how different it is from field experiments. So 3.2.2 and 3.2.3. So experimental research is something that happens in the laboratory, whereas field experiment is something that happens in real life. Okay. So experimental research mainly used in science subjects such as physics, chemistry, medicine, biology, etc. It has 2 variables, one independent and other dependent. The important thing is that the independent variable is manipulated and the effect is observed on the dependent variable. All the extraneous factors or the external factors are completely controlled in the lab. It is based on research design, so it mainly uses manipulation and controlled testing. So there is manipulation of the independent variable and controlled testing to understand the causes on the process. So we can manipulate one or more variables to understand their effect on the dependent variable. So it is a systematic and scientific approach done in the lab. Whereas field experiments, so the key term is field. Field means somewhere outside on the field where you understand the study. So the field key term in field experiments help us understand that this is something that happens in real life. So it is an experiment that's conducted in real life situation. So controlling the external factors is not possible to a large extent as it is a natural setting. Here we are taking, so to understand how much the cause is due to how much the effect is due to the cause, we cannot just have one group where the testing happens. We also need a comparison or a control group. Okay, so there are 2 groups, and these 2 groups, the control group and the experimental groups, are matched for a number of factors such as age, sex, education, socioeconomic status, etc. Both these groups are in real life setting, so they may be subjected to similar extraneous variables, and therefore we can assume that the confoundingness or the confusion or the issues caused by the extraneous variables will be removed or will be equated. And here the experimenter observes the effect of manipulation on the test group, and they will see and compare it with the control group, which has not been subjected to any intervention or manipulation. So one easy example is medical research, wherein we are trying to find the effect of certain medicines. So the medicine is given to a particular category. So say people of the same age or the same gender, of the same race, so that they have similar genetics, and they compare it. They give medicine to one group and a placebo or a sugar pill to the other group. So the placebo or sugar pill will not produce any effect on the disease, whereas the medicine will produce effect on the disease, and thus we can study how efficient the medicine is. So similar example here is given on when the researcher wants to understand the effect of different methods of teaching. So class 5 students are taken, 100 students are taken, 50-50 they've been randomly assigned, and 50% students get to be trained with one group, say lecture method, and the other group has tutorial method, the control group has the tutorial method, and they see the performance at the end of the year and see that if the learning has been better in the tutorial or in the lecture group, and they'll understand whichever group had better, that would be considered as a more effective teaching method. So this is the difference between experimental research and field experiment. So now we are going to see this in a tabular form. So experimental research versus field experiment, and this has been repeatedly asked. Okay, so in an experimental research, the subjects are homogeneous, whereas in a field experiment, experimental research as in the lab setting, it's a homogeneous subject. In the field experiment or the real life setting, subjects may vary in number of characteristics. In experimental setting or the lab experiment, subjects are under controlled conditions, but in a field experiment, they are not under controlled condition but under natural settings. In the experimental group, one experimental group is taken and they are subjected to manipulation, and the effect is seen on the experimental group itself. But in a field experiment, two groups which are matched for certain basic characteristics are taken. So then they are subjected to then one of it is subjected to the intervention or the manipulation, and the end result on both the group, result of the dependent variable on both the group are compared to see what effects have been produced by the intervention. The fourth difference is the cause-effect relationship can be clearly established in the lab experiment as all extraneous factors are controlled. So it's purely the interaction of the intervention cost. But cause-effect relationship cannot be extremely accurate in field experiment, but it can be established to quite an extent since we cannot control the extraneous factors. In experimental research, prediction is possible and accurately we can predict a phenomenon under the given conditions, and in a field experiment, prediction is possible to a certain extent as a real life situation cannot be or may not be same at all the places. The experiment is always quantitative when it comes to experimental research. Field experiment can be both quantitative and qualitative with respect to the result. Experimental research is always replicable. Field experiment may be replicable with certain modification and certain matching factors. When they are introduced, they can be replicable. So experimental research can be used when there is a time priority. That is when cause has to always happen before the effect. When there is a consistency in the causal relation, that is a cause will definitely lead to a result. And when there is a strong correlation or strong impact, the magnitude of the correlation is high. So experimental research, the researchers manipulate one variable and control other variables. There could be control group, but since the experimental situation is highly under control, usually we don't keep a control group for experimental research. There is the subjects are randomly assigned to the different experimental conditions, and the researcher needs to be clear on to what variables need to be tested. Field experiments are also called as quasi experiments, and actively researcher is trying to observe what has been influencing the consequences. So when dealing with human subjects, always possible and advisable to use field experiment or quasi experiment, so that certain phenomena and the changes are observed in the natural setting, so that can give you better input, information and knowledge about what actually happens in a real life situation. Okay, so this actually helps to understand social progress of a community. So strengths and weakness of field experiment, like all the other all the experimental methods, this is also very important. The question on differences, question on strengths and weaknesses, question on steps of the particular research method, all of these have been repeated questions. So strength and weakness is another repeated question. So strengths of the field experiment. So here it is about field experiment. Strength is it is useful for behavioral and social scientists. It is appropriate for studying complex social influences, processes, etc. that are happening in the real life setting. Third, it is most suited to testing theory and finding solution of practical problems because it is a real life setting. It is used to testing broad hypotheses, and flexibility and applicability to a wide variety of problem is possible because again this is happening in the natural setting. Limitations of the field experiment are 1. Extraneous variables can confound the research findings because they cannot be really controlled in the real life settings. Attitude of the researcher can be a cause of bias. Consent and cooperation of the subjects are required, and the authority or the institution where the study is going to be conducted, that is also needed. And there could be a lack of precision in the field experiment because we are not able to control all the factors. Okay. The next topic 3.4 is given as constructing the field experiment. This is same as steps of a field experiment. Okay. So in all of the chapter it's given as steps, but here it is given as constructing the field experiment. So all the steps include 1. Planning. So good planning ensures the research is carried out properly with proper conditions, appropriate tools and measures. Sampling, again systematic and appropriate sampling with proper selection of sampling needs to be done, and ideally probability sampling is preferred. Third is research design. So research design means it is the blueprint of research work. So what has to be actually done, what experiment will be done, who will be doing, what will be the subjects, what will be the setting, what will be the sample, how will it be conducted, what instruments will be used, what variables will be manipulated, what all effects will be observed, how will it be measured, and also the number of subjects that will be part, and then what is the control group. All of this includes the research design. Then it's the tool of data collection. Then the procedure, actual research procedure. So once all of the other things, the sampling, planning, research design, data collection tool, all have been decided, then we get the permission from authorities to use the setting, and because it's a real life setting, we have to take permission from the authorities to do. For example, say we need to do it in a school or in a hospital, we need to take a permission from the authorities. And then we do the random assignment of sample to the experiment and the control group. Then we do the testing, we do the observation, we take the results. And now once we have all the results, we do the statistic observation and the results of the data. We do a statistical analysis to understand what is actually, what kind of intervention really made a difference. So between the experimental and the control group, we'll understand which method really made a difference. So this is how a field experiment is conducted. Again, planning, sampling, except planning, sampling would be similar to many other research processes. Research design is very important here. The procedure is important. Final statistical analysis and also appropriate tests like t-test or ANOVA test, whatever is needed to understand the difference, that needs to be done here. So again, the next topic is on research design. So research design was third step of conducting a field experiment. So research design is again seen as an important topic. Research design, how is research design, what is research design, objectives of research design, that's the next topic. Then types of experimental research design, all of these have also been asked in the exam. So we are going to go to that topic. So research design is again very important for the exam point of view. Research design, as we already said before, as a step of the field research, it means to explore relationship between the variables. It is a scientific methodology happening in a control setting, and the basic scientific tools of research is used, and this actual research design gives scientific status to psychology because it's a scientific attempt to study behavioral patterns. So the controlled observation here refers to impact of independent and dependent variable under specific conditions. Okay. Sometimes we also get to manipulate the independent variables with certain controls, and here the principle of randomization as much as possible needs to be followed. So the research design has to have plan, structure and a strategy of investigation. So the idea is that research design is conceived to obtain answers to your research questions and to control variance. All this time we've been talking about getting the answers, and we also need to control variance. Variance means if we have a particular answer. For example, in the previous chapter we said poor parenting could be a reason for delinquents. So then we are also having other causes like lack of good role models, or we are saying peer pressure, or we are saying some political issues. All of these also caused. Okay. And then if you're finding too many people have, even though the majority, say if there are 100 people and say 50% has poor parenting as the cause, but in the remaining 50, around 40 people have peer pressure as a cause. So then that means there's a large number which varies from the average result. So we need to control the variance. We need to make sure that whatever cause we are finding, it mostly could be the only cause, or if the other cause is also relevant, we need to understand if that is also equally relevant, and then say that both of these have caused it. So that variance means how much a result moves away from the actual cause or the mean of the result. So variance should always be reduced and controlled. So research design has three aspects. One is plan, the overall scheme or program of study in the form of a study proposal. Structure of research means it's a more specific research outline with the scheme and the operation of variables, all of those. And strategy means it's a more detailed and specific than the plan. So what method we use to collect data, the instruments used, how do we analyze and interpret data, how the strategies will be used to obtain the research objectives, all of these, and how will we take care of challenges that come in. All of this is very important. So research design is the overall general structure of how to conduct the experiments. So objectives of the research design. So as I already said, there are two objectives for research design. One we've already been saying right from chapter 1, which is to provide answers to the question, and second is to control the variance. Okay, so to provide answers to research question, so the answers have to be provided in the form of validity, objectivity, accuracy and economical aspect of the research. The researcher is not inclined to give answer in a common language or a layman term, but answer in terms of valid, objective, accurate data. Scientific research needs to be done. For example, factorial design is a very economical way of design. So different methods could be used to achieve all these objectives. Okay, and research problems asked when they are stated on the form of hypothesis, we could have multiple or valid hypotheses that we get when we are reading the literature and everything, but the researcher has to understand all these, and then based on the hypothesis and type of the problem have to select the type of research design which is most suited to get the appropriate answers. Okay, so if there is only one interaction of one variable, factorial design is more appropriate. So if there are multiple variables, then we can use multiple factorial designs and other methods which we'll learn in future. Then adequate planning and design is also important here. And this also helps to, the adequate planning also helps to decide how to manipulate the active variables, how to categorize the attribute variables, how to understand and avoid the extraneous variables, all of these. So the next objective of research design is to control the variance under study. So the score deviation is called variance. So as I was explaining before, how much when we do a research, our hypothesis says that A can cause B, and how much our result, the experimental result matches this hypothesis, A is actually causing B. That if A is causing B, if we are able to get that as the answer, then there is very less variance. But if we think that A can cause B, but there also could be multiple other things, that means there is a higher variance in the result. So so this deviation of the score is called as variance, and this has to be controlled. So certain principles are used by researchers to give an efficient design so that variance can be controlled. One, to maximize the variance of variable. So to reduce the variance, to control the variance, we are trying to maximize the variance of variable. So in a systematic way, when we do it, it's called as experimental variance. The main task of experimenter is to maximize the variance. So if the independent variable does not vary substantially, there is little chance of separating its effect from the total variance of the dependent variable. It is necessary to give chance to the variance to show itself separately from the total variance. So the purpose of a good research is to maximize systematic variance, which means if I am saying A causes B and I am giving only one or two values of A, then I'll see when I give one value for A. So for example, if I'm saying smoking causes cancer. Okay, if I'm making a person or if I'm studying how a person who's smoking one packet of cigarette, what is their effect on the incidence of cancer. If I'm just looking at one packet of cigarette, then I'll have very little data to work with. So maybe I can say if I'm doing this experiment 10 people who are smoking one packet of cigarettes, and I'll say that okay, out of the 10 maybe 8 of them have it. So that could be a cause. But if I just do that one thing, that may not be the real answer. So if I'm going to do it, say I'm doing with experiment with one packet of cigarette, 2 packets of cigarette, 5 packets of cigarette, 10 packets of cigarette, and I'm doing this test for 10 people each, then I'm seeing that when I'm increasing the independent variable, when I'm giving a large, so if the independent variable does not vary substantially, that is to maximize the variance. So when I'm giving a large variation for the independent variable, then I can see if the effect is actually a result of the independent variable. So when I'm making, when I'm testing the effect of one packet cigarette smoking, maybe in 10 people I saw that some 4 or 3 people got it. But when I'm giving 10 packets of cigarette, I'm seeing that there is 100% cause-effect relationship. So that helps me understand that okay, it could be a very strong cause. But if I'm measuring, say a person is having one packet of cigarette, one set of people is having one packet of cigarette, another set of people are having poor lifestyle factors. For example, the poor lifestyle factors as in no exercise or eating a lot of junk food. And third, I'm looking at people who are exposing themselves in a polluted environment. Then how can I conclude that cigarette smoking itself is a cause of cancer? Then I'll have to give variance in all these variables. I'll have to give variation. I have to increase the variance so that I can understand that when this particular factor is really high, that is actually showing an effect on the incidence of cancer. So which is what is meant by maximize the variance of the variable. So again, when I'm reading this sentence now, you will understand it better. So if the independent variable does not vary substantially, little chance is there to separate its effect from the total variance of the dependent variable. So when there is a large variation given to the independent variable, then we can identify the effect on the dependent variable separately from other variables and conclude that the variance can be controlled in our study. The second is to control extraneous variance. So independent variable is what we control. Extraneous variable is what is already there in the system. So purpose of effective research is to control extraneous variance which can confound or confuse the result of the experiment. So 3 ways to control the extraneous variable is to eliminate that extraneous variance as a variable, to control the extraneous variance through randomization, and to build it in the design as an independent. So to make the extraneous variance also as a independent variable so that we can understand if it is actually causing the issue. And the third principle is to minimize error variance. So one we understood, to control variance, one we are trying to do is minimize variance of the variable. Second is to control the extraneous variable. And third is to minimize error variance. So we can minimize error variance by reduction of measurement through control conditions. So the measurement when we do, we have to reduce the error and increase the reliability of the measurement by using reputed measuring devices or by doing repeated measurements, so that we reduce the error in the variance caused by the measurement. So the research design, why are we doing a research design? One is to provide answers to our research questions, and second is to control the variance under study. The controlling variance happens by maximizing the variance of the variable, then by controlling the extraneous variable, and third by minimizing error variance. Okay, so when we follow all these, that also becomes a good research design. So the next topic, criteria for good research design. One is understanding if there is a specific answer to the question. Does the design give specific answer to the question? Does the design adequately test the hypothesis that we have presented? Does the design represent the appropriate question or problem? Does the design adequately control the extraneous variable? Can we generalize the study to other subjects? And does the design give internal and external validity? If all these are there, then the research design is a good research design. So this has not been asked as a question, but this is important because we will be seeing this repeatedly in other places also. In the first block also we have seen this. Here also we are seeing this. The next topic is type of experimental research design. This is also a repeated question. So in real life, it's not always possible to do pure experimental research in behavioral and social sciences because it's difficult to control all variable and influences from outside and inside as we can do in a lab setting. So the experimental situations may not be possible or accurate. So to control the extraneous variable, what we are doing is we are taking multiple designs, research designs, so that maximum randomization and maximum control of variances is possible. Okay, so we are the different types of designs that we are going to see is single case experimental design, quasi-experimental design and experimental design. So again here when you see the different types, it may sound a bit confusing, but anyways let's go and understand what this is. So single case experimental design, it is useful in clinical research, especially for behavior modification. So the design provides detailed information of human behavior, which is not possible in group design. The single case helps to get detailed information as opposed to group designs. So repeated measurements are also possible here, and we can identify subtle changes in the subject behavior. So the repeated measurements also increase the reliability. So it's not suitable for generalizing findings because there's a small number of subjects and they have not been randomly selected. It's more like a case study that we are going to do. And the next is quasi-experimental design or a field research design. So this is where the researcher does not have full control over the assignment of experimental units randomly, or to the treatment conditions, or to manipulating treatment conditions, or to extraneous factors, and this is a quasi-experimental design. So the situations are not fully under control of the researcher. So that causes some limitation, but there are certain advantages that it is possible to select subjects randomly, and then experiment can be done in the natural and real life setting. So there is realism and the information can be extrapolated to the general audience, and different kinds of problems about past situations can be analyzed. Which especially situations which cannot be addressed in a laboratory can be addressed by the quasi or experimental design or a field research design. And experimental design, again, which is conducted in lab with complete control, and we can assign subjects randomly to treatment groups. We can manipulate independent variables, study pure effect of the manipulation. Experiment has complete control over scheduling of independent variables. We can use high-level advanced statistical methods to analyze data like F-test, correlation, regression, analysis, etc. And there are few types in this itself. It's called as between subjects design, within subject design, mixed design, classical pre-test post-test design, Solomon four-group design, and factorial design. This topic may sound a bit confusing, but anyways I'm going through it because this has been repeatedly asked for exams. So we already know what an experimental design is, and now we are understanding the different types. So one is between subjects design, other is within subject design, then third is mixed design, then fourth is pre-test post-test, then fifth is Solomon four-group test, and sixth is factorial design. Okay. So in the between subject design, each subject is observed only under one of the treatments. So between subject, that is only one is being used to one condition is one treatment condition is used to observe the subject. Within subject design means within subject. So every subject is observed under all the treatment conditions. Mixed design is a mix of within subject and between subject. Classical pre-test post-test means the participant is randomly divided into two, control and experiment, and experiment sample is exposed to the manipulated variable. Researcher compares the pre-test, before test results with after test result for both groups. Okay. So before test, how did you see certain effects in the experimental and control group, and after you do the test, how did you see the effects? So that is a pre-test post-test design. And then next is Solomon four-group design. So here in the pre-test post-test, we divide the sample into two, the experimental and the control. But in the Solomon four group, so sample is randomly divided to four groups. Two are experimental and two are control groups. So two groups receive a pre-test post-test, two groups receive only post-test. So this is a slightly more advanced version of the classical pre-test post-test design. And then factorial design, it is similar to classical design, just that there will be additional samples which are being used, and each group has exposure to different experimental manipulation. So factorial design we will see in future chapters, so there we will be able to understand it better. So here we just learn it as a definition. In the future chapter, in the future block, we will be seeing factorial design in detail. So with this, we come to the end of this chapter on our experimental research and field experiment. Thank you. See you again.